Hey all, this is my new endgame science hub. It is a doubling of my previous setup. It targets 16 belts of every science, and it is fueled by now 16 active Promethean ships deep in the field. They're equally spaced apart, and they're eating all of my performance. But it has gotten me to 5.4 million SPM, and this amount of Promethean research is basically the maximum that I can currently process on this machine before it starts throttling my game speed. Now, of course, you can go much higher than this in terms of raw SPM, particularly if you're not doing Promethean science. But with my setup on my machine, scaling up more is not actually going to help me research any faster. So for me to actually increase any speed at this point, we need to optimize what we have. So in this video, we're going to be revisiting hub design, hub performance questions as backed by benchmarks this time, because it's already well known that hub performance scales non-linearly with throughput, so it's useful to know the type of performance hit to expect if you decide to scale up yours, and how much it actually matters in the grand scheme of things. But first, the Novice Hub, if you are not familiar, is a kind of a unique throughput problem in Factorio Space Age, where all your off-world sciences need to funnel through this one structure before they reach your labs. And in my opinion, it's a kind of cool design challenge, because it ends up forcing this very iconic structure right in the center of your base. And no two of these hubs are going to look exactly the same, even though they all have to achieve kind of the same thing. They end up being designed for a particular scale, often with a particular lab layout and science requirement in mind. But what they do have in common is they tend to all be very compact, because while there's a lot of magic around some optimization techniques for the hub, one optimization is the very intuitive one, and that is compactness. Because compactness is essential to minimize the number of expensive and unavoidable logistic bots over this area here. Now, of course, you may look at this chaotic mess and ask, in what possible universe is this minimizing bot use? Like, you have thousands of bots here, and you are not wrong. This is using between 2,000 and 3,000 bots under maximal load, depending on worker speed, and my frame rate is dipping just looking at this. But even so, like, I would argue that this is close to the minimum number of bots you can have for this scale. Because there's currently no way to get this much throughput out of hubs in Factorio 2.0 without doing most of it with bots. And the reason for this is, again, the limited amount of hub contact points around the central structure here. You can only really extract 15 full belts if you use Q5 stack inserters on all the available contact points when you account for a cargo bay access point. So you're pretty much destined to hit a point where every additional lane of imports must be squeezed through this like one central pixel here using logistic bots. And usually this happens somewhere around 1 million ESPM, but this exact number will vary a great deal depending on your research prod levels, equality use, and other import factors. But it's an inevitable Megabase problem. So let's focus on this hub. We need 16 belt equivalents of all of the 6 outer sciences. So Vulcanus, Fulgora, Gleba, Aquilo, also Space Science and Promethean Science. So by default, that means 6 times 16, so 96 belts if we weren't using inequality, because quality sciences are denser, so it basically halves the demand for the stuff that we can do quality for. And we do Q2 on Vulcanus, Fulgora and Aquilo, and we even do Q5 on Space Science. So like for Space Science in particular, we only need like less than 3 belts of it. Technically, that means that brings it down to 58 belts. But then we need 2 extra overflow belts for agricultural. We need 2 extra belts for calcite. So all in all, that brings it up to 62 belts. Now, 15 of these belts can come from the hub, but I only get 13 out of it due to a trade-off that I'll get into. So 62 minus 13 is 49 belts. So all in all, 49 belts have to be transported by bots in this hub. So this shows that at this level, bots account for the overwhelming majority of the transportation, like almost 80% in my case. So we want to optimize them. We want to optimize the number of bots, the number of roboports. We want to optimize the travel distance for the bots for better throughput per charge cycle. And the logical consequence of this is that the hub needs to be packed as tightly as possible. Particularly the area close to the top left center of the hub here is very valuable because bots have a crazy throughput over short travel distances. So the more we can do super close to that point of the hub, the better. So let's go into the editor here so that I can show you some of the tricks that we are using to get some compactness. But let's first remove this infinity active provider chest so that we can actually see what's going on. So now we only have the traffic that is coming from the inserters that would be around the hub normally. So the thing that stands out immediately should be that there are tanks here. Like there are 8 tanks scattered around various points, and that's for 2 reasons. First, tanks, as you can see, if we turn on the debug option, show sticker boxes, you can see that they have a large rectangular hitbox that rotates with the tank. So with careful positioning, you get to pick up things from angles that you wouldn't normally be able to, particularly like this inserter here, hovering over the other inserter. So in many ways, it's kind of like cars again, but they also have a logistic network, so you can use them as these large, bulky requester chests. Secondly, tanks are actually also so bulky that you can put stuff under them. As you can see here, there's actually, where is it? You can see there's actually an underground right under this tank, which this thing is somehow not targeting. So that does mean that there's a cursed downside here, that this hub is now build order dependent, because you need to make sure that the inserters are actually locking onto the right things. Like this inserter needs to be locking onto the tank and not the underground, which means you have to place the underground after the tank. I can show this if I take this away. Now this is starting putting Promethean signs onto this belt, so it's kind of undermining the other inserters. So that's not what we want, and you can see it's not fixed by just putting the tank back. So you have to actually go and find a way to remove this and then put the tank on first and then put the underground on after. So, but the idea is like you build this thing once, and once you get all the inserters to do the right thing, you can even like place lamps under it, like this one here, because they don't interfere with the inserters once the inserters have locked on to the right thing. Then we have the cars, same kind of reason as for the tanks, big bulky inserter ranges. Allows you, particularly good at allowing you to utilize the inserters around the corners here. And it also helps you maximize the throughput of the hub inserters. Like these guys are now going at the maximum rate they can, and they are multiplexing out to these 6 that are going to the maximum rate that they can onto belts, because it's a slower rate onto belts. So this is kind of the optimal setup for it. It also gets to use, this particular setup here gets to utilize the slightly longer and more rotated Fulgora car, so that we can pick up here away from the big cargo bay that we have to make room for. And this is like basically a full 4 tiles away from the insertion point. So, you know, this is using a few more tiles of space here, but it's actually fine because it's the bad side of the hub. Most of the bots end up coming out on the top left side here. So we do want to make the hub more top left heavy, and as you can see, that is how it is designed. Now, one thing you might notice we're not doing as much is this exact thing here of doing inserter maximization of the throughput. Because you'll see we have a lot of inserters that are doing this much more primitive thing here of inserting directly onto underground entrances, and this is slower. You get less throughput out of these inserters here than normal. It's still enough to fill a half belt, but you know, if you were targeting an open belt like this, 3 inserters would be enough to max out a single belt, but you do need to make room for basically 9 tiles to do a 3-to-1 balancer, and also an additional tile for the underground. So it doesn't always make sense here. It makes kind of sense because you get to utilize the tank for it. But otherwise, this is plenty sufficient, particularly because you're only really giving a half belt to a single lab array anyway. Similarly, we also use inserters less efficiently in general around the center. Like in this case here, we have 4 inserters inserting to fill a belt, which could be done with 3, but you have to make room for a splitter. So like this is trading off inserter performance in favor of better bot performance. So of course you may ask, is this actually going to be worth it? And I mean, you can only really look at the numbers here and see this is 260-ish inserters. So it's going to be like a drop in the ocean compared to the base is going to be put in with almost 50,000 inserters. Whereas if we think about the bot use, it's going to be 2,000 to 3,000 bots over this area. That's going to be over 95% of my bot use. So I think it's a much more important thing to focus on the bot performance here. The final inserter trade-off that I'm doing here is these 4 belts here, close to the hub on the top left and right side. And I'm not actually sure this is worth it or not. So I'm basically inserting onto open belts here. And this is primarily so that I can make room for this tank close to the hub. So like this is very close to the hub, so they get to have very high throughput for very little bot use. But it does also mean that these 4 inserters here are all only operating at 2/3 of the capacity that they could if they were going into an object, like a car. So this means I'm sacrificing a full 2 belts of throughput to what could be done that now has to be going by bots instead. So this one, I am not sure it's worth it. At any rate, it's probably not going to be a significant optimization, but I have started with it, and it's kind of hard to change at this point. So those are the optimizations for compactness. But there are actually 2 much more important considerations for hub performance. And the first of those is to correctly size your robot network. So this involves making sure you don't have more bots in the system than you need. You can see I have 5,000 here, but only around 3,000 of them are actually used. And also to make sure you don't have more roboports than you actually need, because you can see even during the more chargy cycle of these bots, like right now, there's a lot of roboports that are generally not used for charging. So we want to get rid of those, because if you don't, excess here does seem to stress the game's code in ways that I cannot fully explain, but this always shows up on benchmarks. And I can kind of prove this to you. Let's actually just zoom out here for fairness and increase speed to maximum, so we can kind of see the UPS we're getting out of it. You can see 1100, 1200. I'd say we're sitting average on maybe 1200. So let's see what happens if we reduce the bot number. Let's put a maximum of 3000 in here, and just let's control click out a bunch of bots until we drop below 3000. What are we at? 3008, 3008. Come on, there's lots of bots in here somewhere. 3000, okay. 3000 bots, and then let's kill a bunch of roboports on top of it. Take some of the corner ones. Doesn't really matter. Cool, 3003 bots. You can see we picked up all of these. Now let's do the same thing again. Zoom out, increase speed to maximum. And you can see right now we're at like 1200, 1300. Yeah, so we're gained pretty much 100 UPS here for this relative test by just cutting a little bit. Now, one of the surprising things here is that you can actually take this really far. Here is a variant of the experiment that I was just showing you, but instead of just taking down a few roboports, we're actually almost halved them, actually more than halved them. We're down to 105, I believe, roboports, yeah, down from 220, which was the original starting point. And we also reduced bots to 2600. You can see there's basically never any free bots basically in the system. And if we are doing the same type of crude test here, zoom out and max speed, you can see we're actually up to like 1500 now, kind of average, I would say. So that's basically now 300 extra UPS more. So that's a 25% boost by just this alone. And now this is actually the minimum numbers that I can get away with these settings. And the way I kind of judge this is by looking at, like I have a chest here that's kind of at the edge, is one of the ones that are the furthest away, and it's one of the first ones to dip. And you can see it is kind of struggling. If I speed up, you'll be able to see if it ever dips. I think there might have been a single dip there, but you see this one is just right at the edge of keeping up with the requests. But you know, if you look around here and look at the roboports, you almost wouldn't think this is a healthy state, but it actually is. Like, you are utilizing almost all of the charging spots of the roboports all the time. Now, as to why this is so efficient, we are not entirely sure, but we are making a guess here from the fact that we have this really small area with a large number of robot requests, with a large number of bots to assign these tasks, and a large number of roboports as sources for these tasks. So, you know, you can easily imagine there being some type of ON squared type computational complexity algorithm hiding in the back of the game here, but we're only really guessing this based on the numbers that we are seeing. But at any rate, it is one of the easier optimizations to do, and there's basically 25% improvement potentially here for you by just cutting roboports, depending on how many you are starting with. But it is an optimization that you can take too far, because like if you cut too much, it will affect your throughput. And if you see your research dropping, you will know you've gone too far. One potentially helpful thing with this is that you can turn on the debug option, the show logistic targets, which will give you this view. And you can see basically how many free charging spots that you have in your robot networks. So you can check this under peak load. And you can see that, oh yeah, it's actually a few ones here that are not fully utilized all the time. So I can probably kill a few more. Now, the last important consideration here is roboport distribution, basically the layout of your roboports. And this comes with a really surprising result, because if you think about it, you would expect that the roboport location closest to the hub would be the best solution, because a closer, more co-located roboport setup should mean shorter distances for bots to travel when it's time to recharge. So I was very much expecting this to be the major factor and for it to show up in the benchmarks. But in fact, what you actually get is a result that seems to say the opposite. Because if you pull out roboports like this somewhat evenly, you actually get another big jump in UPS despite the extra travel time that the bots have to do. This example here, we are now spreading them out in clusters of 5 roboports, and it's running a total of 100 roboports here. It's even adding bots, it's 3000 bots, the same worker robot speed as before, but it's more distributed. So let's do the same type of crude test, and 64x, and we can see we're now up to 1650 UPS kind of average. So that's another 150 UPS here. We're now getting close to 40% performance improvement, and this is keeping up. Like, we're not dropping anything. This is it's very surprising that you're getting so much from this. So like, at this point, we're going to have to ask ourselves what's actually going on here. Why is this better? And it turns out this is actually connected to the underlying algorithm in the game for assigning robots to roboports for charging. And we actually have some basis for this, because we have had a dev explain this to us. The game is basically iterating over chunks of a certain size, and then the game will then look for a suitable roboport within that smaller area. And if it cannot find one in that it will end up falling back to a larger area. So it's a kind of an optimization to reduce the search space for suitable roboports. But the fallback in that algorithm does sound like it will struggle with a really packed hub, because you might end up with like a really dense search space to start out with, or you might potentially end up with a search space that is always full because it's really close to all the action, and then you might trigger the fallback case very often. So this is kind of the things that we have to go on and try to then investigate further. So I've made a bunch of combinations, and this is actually one of the better ones that I've found here. I can turn on the tile grid, so you can see some big rectangular grids here now that kind of shows chunk boundaries. And this is the solution that I found that seems to perform the best in general. It's not the winning benchmark, but it is the layout that consistently performed better. And I was basically having 5 roboports per chunk, and as many chunks as is then needed to do that. You can see this consistently only 5. So now we're getting into the territory where you have to be a bit lucky with how the hub is even positioned in the first place, so that this is feasible to do. Because you can see I'm getting perfectly 5 on each side here. So yeah, this is kind of awkward, but this definitely does seem to be a kind of a sweet spot here, because we're not using too many chunks. They're all relatively close, kind of lucky based on the layout. 6 roboports per chunk was worse, 8 was worse. So yeah. Now, this also interacts with the worker robot speed upgrade, because as you level up worker robot speed, this extra trip that some of the bots need to do to the further roboports, this becomes an increasingly small percentage of the overall works these bots have to do. So this is actually the winner. It's exactly the same as the one I just showed you, but it has cranked worker robot speed from 25 to 27, so an additional 7 levels. And in doing so, we've also been able to cut 400 bots out of the system, so we're down to 2,600 And I want to highlight that because this is the part of worker robot speed that actually gives you any benefits. Because you can press that button as many times as you want, and it's going to make just a negligible amount on the benchmarks here. But what worker robot speed actually gives you is headroom, and you can then clear that headroom because that's what gives you the benefit. So I can just show you how this performs here, do the same test as the crude thing once again, and we can see now we're actually hitting 1700. So clearly this is better as well. I did also try and crank it to 37, which is getting into complete silly territory in terms of research, but it is territory that someone has technically made. Like MRX did just complete this, and it is a 2 trillion science upgrade. But, you know, mileage varies here, and it was basically very little improvement. But you got another 200 bots you could kill in going those extra levels. So we are back in the base one final time here. This is how it looks after my final adjustments to the Roboport layouts. As you can see, I have gone for this slightly different horseshoe crab layout here. The biggest thing is that I have really tuned down the number of Roboports. I'm actually down to 92, which is lower than what I was able to benchmark with, but this was also because the benchmark was assuming a very pessimistic view of the world. It was assuming that all of these inserters were going at full blast, which is generally not true, particularly for stuff like bioflux, calcite, and space science. Now, a thing you might notice is that I have not done the final optimization, like I've not done the whole distributed Roboport layout thing, because the grids end up clashing very heavily with the way I've done my belts. I don't really want to redo those. But, you know, even if I did butcher the belt layout, I wouldn't necessarily get the same benefit here, and it's also really hard to test this final bit with the Promethean ships, so I've left this out for now. Tuning the network is the biggest improvement anyway, and this is a lot prettier. And a second reason for not bothering with this is that all of this gave me basically 1% improvement. And I should have expected this from the entity numbers that came out of the isolated benchmarks, because they were already telling me that this was at most going to account for 3% of the entire base. So, you know, 30 to 40% improvement on top of 3% is at most going to be like 1%. So, you know, I've gained a little over an FPS. I worked pretty hard for it, so I'll take it. But, you know, 1%. Now, this just goes to show that even at this scale of hub design, the hub is not nearly as big of a UPS hog as you might think, especially if you are focusing on Promethean research, because the ships are such an overwhelming majority of your UPS cost. And while you might think this is a little counterintuitive that it doesn't account for more, because you can see that this totally kills my frame rates here. If I'm, like, I can show you my frame update time here while I am hovering over the hub. As you can see, this is currently throttling my game speed. Like you can see, this is 17, 18 ms right now. 16, above 16 is when you start getting throttled. So I am being throttled right now, but this is because it's the graphical rendering that is slowing down the simulation. But, you know, all I need to do is put the screen away from the chaos, and the simulation is unblocked while I relax on my little oil island here. So it's the rendering that's costly. So, you know, just don't look at it, or at least don't idle right next to it. So the game is remarkably efficient, actually, but it all comes down to scale in this game in the end. So if you have a hub with like 100 or more belts that you actually need to pull out of it, then these optimizations that we've gone through here may be a lot more valuable to you than to me. So to summarize, if you want to optimize the hub, you want to basically minimize the number of Roboports, and you want to be more aggressive with it than you probably think. If you want the extreme optimization variant of Roboport layout, then you also want to spread them out across chunks. You also want to minimize the number of bots in the network, and also ideally you have a pretty compact foundation around the requester chests and tanks, etc. And if you have time to get worker robot speed research, then that also helps, because it helps you reduce the size of the network later on. As for this base here, I am very happy to be able to actually run this big hub with just 1900 bots shy of. It's barely twice the amount that I was running at 2.8 million. And I actually have less Roboport now than before I doubled. Now, this is obviously because I have learned how to scale them, and I didn't really know that before. But at the very least, I'm happy to report that this hub here was not the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the 16 Promethean ships, to no one's surprise. So that's probably the thing to consider next. I will link the blueprint and stuff in the description. Probably not going to clean it up too much, because these things are super base dependent, so I figure these things are more useful for inspiration than anything else, so you'll have to fix any build order issues yourself. But let me know if you do find this useful, or if you have any suggestions in the comments. Otherwise, until next time, take care, everyone.